Hi, this is Dr. Carl Goldkamp. If you're interested in learning about the ketogenic diet like I was, to save my own life, then this is probably the podcast for you. 8 years ago, I knew nothing about it. 6 years ago, it saved my life. 3 years ago, I started researching and talking with some of the authorities in the field and attending medical conferences about this to understand why and how keto so dramatically changed my and my wife's Judi's lives. The purpose of this podcast is to share our journey of discoveries with you in understanding how keto is so effective in improving so many different conditions, from obesity, epilepsy, diabetes, infertility, MS, Alzheimer's, heart disease, to name a few. So take a step away from all the hype you've probably heard and roll up your sleeves with me and join me weekly to explore this living miracle that anyone can access. We'll talk science, we'll talk food. We'll explore its history and evolution to today, which is that the sheer wonder of the ketogenic way of eating has changed untold number of lives, unlike anything before it. And in case I forget to mention it, please join our Facebook group, Keto Naturopath. Welcome back, everybody, for another episode of Keto Naturopath. Today we have a very exciting interview. I saw Dr. Palmer, Christopher Palmer, Chris, present down at Low Carb USA at West Palm, a couple months ago. And in my view, he's at an uncomfortable edge that he's creating his expertise. And I say uncomfortable edge because he works in psychiatry, and there's greater risks there than just, and I don't mean pejorative here, of helping people lose weight and so on and so forth. So Chris, I'm so glad you could make some time to be on this. This is really wonderful.
Well, thank you, Carl, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I could actually go through your talk, but I don't want to, but I have a number of slides I want to reference. I want to say, as we get into basically treating schizophrenia and bipolar and your experience that you've nuanced out, and I'm so impressed, is that in the follow-up panel discussion, you brought up a name I hadn't heard for a while. That was Nora Volkow and her work. And that's such an interesting overlap of her, the whole PET scan of addiction and the obesity brain versus the we'll call it addict brain, how the similarities there. And you, through the ketogenic side of things, or actually not even that, looked at similarities of blood sugar dysglycemias, cerebral and not metabolic, as you would say, bipolar and schizophrenia. So there's an overlap. Just start with there. I throw that out and going, that's pretty fascinating. In one level, it's about receptor differences. Hers is about dopamine, et cetera. And you're looking at it from the ketogenic approach about, wait a minute, we're kind of not far off from epilepsy here in terms of needing a therapeutic, medically therapeutic, classic ketogenic diet approach if we're going to make some headway.
Yeah, no. So it's interesting that you start with Nora Volkow. So for any of your listeners who don't know who she is currently the director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse. So she is a extraordinarily well-known, prominent, renowned researcher in the addiction field. One of the most important contributions she made was showing that animals and people, when they eat foods, certain types of foods, high in carbohydrate and high in fat, the combination of the two, it seems to be the sweet spot, and that those foods activate the exact same reward pathways that addictive substances activate, and that in fact, depending on how you look at it, it could support an argument that some foods might be quote unquote addictive. And that's a somewhat controversial stance still in the academic field. But some people absolutely firmly believe that certain foods are addictive. Or alternatively, you could look at some of her research as showing that addictive substances hijack the normal reward centers in our brain. Mm-hmm. So our brains have normal reward centers focused on getting food, especially good tasting food, having sex, doing other things like that are normally very rewarding. And the addictive substances hijack that same machinery in the brain. Mm-hmm. the really interesting stuff that's been happening lately, both in her own work, specifically as it relates to alcohol use,
Hmm.
but also an entire field of research happening in the mental health field, is that increasingly we are finding abnormalities in metabolism in the brain of people with chronic mental illness. And also, her work showed in people who are heavy drinkers, or as most people refer to as alcoholic.
Hmm.
And so, what happens is that when people drink alcohol, some of that alcohol is actually turned into a ketone body
Hmm.
that ends up in the brain cells and gets used by those brain cells. And when people end up drinking chronically, when they drink on a daily basis in heavy amounts, their brains actually make adaptations. And part of the adaptation is to actually becoming somewhat insulin resistant or glucose resistant. It starts to rely on the alcohol as a source of fuel. And in doing so, it ends up compromising its ability to use glucose as a source of fuel. And so, what she found is that people who are chronic alcoholics, their brains aren't producing as much energy as people who are not heavy drinkers. And so part of that thinking goes along the lines of, well, maybe the reason they can't seem to get themselves to stop drinking is because their brains are actually kind of craving energy, which
Hmm.
is a normal thing. And the only way that they've been able to figure out to get that energy supply to their brain cells is to drink alcohol. So she, along with the National Institute of Alcoholism and Alcohol Abuse, are actually now doing a clinical trial of the ketogenic diet in alcoholics.
Wow.
And they are pairing that with brain scans both before and after. They're doing all sorts of clinical measures, and they're trying to see if the ketogenic diet can help people both withdraw from alcohol
Hmm.
and also possibly, if supplying their brain with ketone bodies, if that can reduce some of their cravings for alcohol and maybe help them achieve longer term abstinence.
That's fascinating. It's fascinating. It reminds me of, and I think I might have sent you the link. There was an MD. He's kind of a crazy guy, but he would do all these YouTubes on saying something similar to that, far less, more simplistic. But his whole thing was about caprylic acid triglyceride, and that's how you're going to rescue the brain. And so he was. I don't know if he got right down to the ketone level. I mean, he knew that A was helping B, and B helps the alcoholic brain, and he was an ex-alcoholic. But that was his whole thing, was, you need to have, and he had a little bottle of C8, which I think is a big deal too. But his whole thing, and he was on it so much it got to be kind of crazy. But he had a truth wrapped up in his lack of a better word, goofiness of presenting it. Does that ring true to you? I mean, so C8 goes right into making ketones, all three of them. Um, does that sound reasonable, or does it sound like, well, he was a crazy guy, but there was a little bit of truth there? you know?
So honestly, that's a big multi-million dollar question right now, because the study that they're doing is a multi-million dollar study.
Yeah.
And I think that there is reason to believe that, in fact, increasing ketones as a source of fuel to the brain may, in fact, help some people with alcoholism. And so I think certainly that is a reasonable theory,
Yeah.
and it's worth pursuing. I think one of the challenges, the challenge in medicine across the board,
Yeah.
we have all sorts of theories that look good on paper, that sound good, but when the rubber hits the road, we really need to know, does this actually help real people? Does it come with side effects? Does it come with risks that maybe end up outweighing the benefit? And so, I think that theory about C8 possibly being helpful to people with alcoholism.
Mhm.
I know that other groups are looking into possibly even using ketone esters,
Mhm.
just going straight to ketones. Are those all worthwhile to study? Absolutely. At this point, I don't think that anyone can say for sure that they will help and in what ways they'll help. Bringing up side effects and risks, one of the risks that I've certainly experienced clinically, I've experienced myself as somebody who's been on a low carb or ketogenic diet for 20 years.
Mhm.
I know all about this. When I am low carbing it, when I'm in ketosis, I notice without a doubt, at least for me personally, alcohol hits me much more powerfully
Mhm.
than when I'm not in ketosis. In other words, my threshold for how much I can drink goes down.
Right.
Now, if I don't monitor that, um, I could easily get really hammered quickly. Like
Mhm.
if I normally think I can handle 3 glasses of wine and be quote unquote okay, when I'm in ketosis, 2 glasses of wine might do that to me, that same thing. And then if I have that third glass of wine, because I kind of know that instinctually that like, oh, well, I can handle 3, I might get a lot more intoxicated or at least feel more intoxicated than I would normally be. And so I think when we're talking about using the ketogenic diet with alcoholics, that's one of the things that's kind of front and center on my mind
Right.
as potentially one of the risks is that, people with alcoholism by definition have trouble, at least at times, controlling their intake of alcohol,
Right.
because that's kind of embedded in the definition of an alcoholic. And so if you start with that as a premise and you put people on a diet that might make them even more sensitive to the effects of alcohol, it's just going to be important to be mindful of that as a risk, and it's going to be something to watch out for.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And with your group of patients, I'll say psychiatric, if I can generalize that, is that when they go home, you don't have control over those behaviors. Whereas somebody's into weight loss, they obviously don't have control over those behaviors when they're home either, but they're less risky relative to that condition. Back to the alcohol for the second is what I have noticed was inadvertent, and then I was talking to Dr. Lowry at the conference as well, is that when you're in ketosis and you have alcohol. So specifically, I had some bourbon and I had it at home, and I'm thinking, I feel like my ketones have just gotten up a lot higher. I have that sort of, I won't say exactly mental clarity. There's another little feeling there. It's not necessarily bad, but there's sort of I'm in a higher ketosis, and I would take my ketones, and they were easily 4, and I think I even got up to 6 or something. So they were a lot higher than one who's been in ketosis for a couple of years, more than a couple of years. So I thought that, and so I mentioned that to him. I go, spirits anyway, I can testify, N of 1 testify that, it increased my ketones. And yes, to everything else was more effective. The alcohol, not more effective. They were more sensitive to the alcohol. Had you noticed that it boosts, there's some sort of, I don't know, switching of tracks that ketones go up to process the alcohol or something like that. I've not found anything that clarified that, but they're vying for the same spot. And so it's either going left or going right is my sense. Do you have any?
That's part of some of the literature that came out that really, I think, spurred Dr. Volkow to do some of the ketogenic research. So what we now know, and this just came out maybe in the last 8 years or so. So most people thought that alcohol really couldn't be used as a source of fuel and certainly not for the brain. But what we found out within the last 8 years or so is that when people consume alcohol, your liver takes that alcohol and actually converts some of it into acetone.
Mhm.
Acetone is a ketone. That ketone goes directly to your brain,
Mhm.
and it's taken up by your brain cells and used as a fuel source. And my guess is that when you consume alcohol, because it triggers the liver to actually make more ketone bodies,
Mhm.
the liver probably ramps up its production of ketones across the board, including beta hydroxybutyrate and other things that maybe aren't derived directly from alcohol, but that alcohol stimulates the process of let's ramp up some ketone production. It provides a source for acetone at least, and then your body's also probably using fats or even carbohydrates or other things to make more ketones. So yeah, I'm actually not surprised that ketone levels go up after consumption of alcohol.
No, it's interesting. Go ahead.
No. So I'm not aware of anybody studying that exact question though. And that study might be out there, but I'm not aware of anybody taking a group of people who are in ketosis, giving them alcohol, and then monitoring for like the next 6 hours what happens to their ketone levels. It would also be interesting to know what happens to their insulin levels and their glucose levels, because all of those would be important metrics.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I would also further differentiate for other related studies is the difference between exogenous ketones and then C8, because what I know about I just interviewed Dr. Kinane about a week or two ago, and he did some C8, C10 studies a couple of years ago, which made me first contact him, is that you have C8 producing all three ketone bodies, whereas exogenous ketones come in as BHB. It's either BHB or not. Use me or get rid of me. And so it's interesting if you were to compare those two. One, you'd had additive acetone production, I'm thinking, and they both produce it, so to say. And others, you would have strictly the alcohol stimulating the liver or converting in the liver to acetone as one of the three ketone bodies. Interesting. Wow. That was it. But so by the way, she is also Trotsky's granddaughter, isn't she? It's for a famous Nora Norkov.
I believe she is, yes.
Amazing. She has the look. She has the look of him. I mean, she's brilliant. I watched her TED Talk a couple of days ago. I was like, wow, I enjoy it. So anyway, so back to you. So you started the ketogenic diet back with per Dr. Atkins. What was your motivation for going in that direction? Just personal, saying, hey, you want to lose a few pounds, and then time has gone by and it's become this colossus that it is in terms of, or was it through epilepsy and all that you had heard and learned about that?
Exactly. I started it with the Atkins diet, and it was back, over 20 years ago now. It was at a time when I was late 20s, early 30s, and I had just finished medical school. I was starting my residency, and I was actually have been a person who's pretty disciplined. And I really wanted to take care of myself. All through medical school, you see the worst of the worst health outcomes. You see people suffering. You see people, dying of all sorts of maladies, some of which are preventable if they stop smoking, if they lose some weight, if they exercise. And so I was really hell-bent on taking care of myself and making sure that I was in good health. And at that point in time, low fat was where it was at. Everybody was supposed to be on a low fat diet because that's what all of the experts were telling us we should do. And so I was on a low fat diet. I was actually on a ridiculously low fat diet. I hardly consumed any fat because we were all told, at least I was told, that the less fat, the better. Fat serves no useful purpose. It's a toxin into our bodies. Just get rid of it. On top of that, I was exercising pretty regularly and religiously. I would go to the gym at least 4 times a week for 1.5 to 2 hours per time that I went to the gym.
Oh.
And so I felt like, I'm doing a pretty good job. I'm doing my best. I'm trying to take care of my health. And lo and behold, my cholesterol was horrible. My LDL was really high. My HDL was pretty much non-existent. My triglycerides were through the roof, over 300. And
wow.
my blood pressure was creeping up. And I kept going to my primary care doctor over and over, year after year, and he keeps calling my attention to these horrible, abysmal numbers. And, and every time we have the conversation, I say, well, what can I do? And he's like, diet and exercise. And I'm like, what diet? Low fat. What kind of exercise? Well, go to the gym, run. I'm doing all that.
Yeah.
And so after a few years of that same kind of conversation, eventually he's like, you got to go on medicine. Like, enough's enough. Your numbers are only getting worse. We need to put you on statins. We need to put you on blood pressure medicine. You're going to drop dead of a heart attack when you're in your 50s. We've got to do something. And I had talked to different people who were doing the Atkins diet, and I had talked to several people who claimed, and this is the way I experienced it, who claimed, like they're crazy people, that their cholesterol actually got better on the Atkins diet, that their blood pressure actually went down on that Atkins diet, that their diabetes got dramatically better on that horrible, evil Atkins diet. And for me, it really felt like an act of defiance. I basically had kind of given up. I kind of figured, well, I'm screwed. The last straw for the primary care doctor was he's like, well, wait, I think I know what's going on. Does your mother have diabetes and high cholesterol? I say yes. Does your father have anything like this? Yes, he's got all of it. And he says, well, it's genetic. You're screwed. There's nothing you can do. And I really kind of believed that. I really thought, okay, I'm screwed. But I've heard of these rebels doing this Atkins diet, and I'm going to give it like 2 months or something. And when it doesn't work, I'll go ahead and take his medicine. And so I tried the Atkins diet, and I went back to my primary care doctor 3 months later, and everything had gotten dramatically better. My LDL had plummeted. My HDL doubled. My triglycerides were less than 100. They went from over 300 to less than 100. And most importantly, in my mind, my blood pressure had plummeted in a good way. It was like about 140-ish over 90, 95, went down to 130 over 110. Or actually, no, I'm sorry, 110 over like 70.
Wow.
And so everything had gotten better. And he's like, what have you done? Like, what are you doing? And I said, I tried the Atkins diet. And he's like, well, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. It's clearly working for you. And so ever since then, I have pretty much stayed on it. I will fully acknowledge I don't do it 100% of the time, every day, every year.
Mm-hmm.
I almost always eat low carb or keto breakfast and lunch because eating carbohydrates slows me down and, if anything, makes me a little more lethargic and sluggish. And so I don't want to feel that way during the day. But I'll go through phases, especially if I'm on vacation with family or friends and they all want to eat out and they almost get mad at you for not participating in the meal or for not, eating the same stuff they're eating. And some of those cases, I'll just go off and I'll be off the diet for a week or two or whatever. And usually I get motivated to get right back on it because I notice a difference in the way I feel. I notice a difference in my energy level, my motivation level. And so I've known about this for 20 years. I've pretty much stayed on it, come back to it. If I need to lose a few pounds, I'll come back to it. And I've pretty much maintained a healthy range of weight. My cholesterol levels have remained very good despite my horrible family history.
Mm-hmm.
My blood pressure has remained really good. So I've been a huge fan. I've convinced innumerable friends and families over the 20 years to do a low carb or ketogenic diet for weight loss. And that to me is like easy. That's like the easy solution. It's low hanging. I know how to motivate people. I know how to get them through the keto flu or the keto adaptation or the carb withdrawal or whatever we want to call it. I know how to do all of that. I think for me, if you're interested, I will share the story of my father,
Go
because
for it. Yeah, absolutely.
the story of my father is quite interesting. And so my father, given my genetics, was a diabetic, had high cholesterol, was overweight, and he was toward the end of his life. He was in his mid 70s, and his diabetes had progressively worsened, and he was on over 180 units of insulin a day, 60 TID,
Mm,
and his blood sugars ranged anywhere from 300 to 600 on that insulin.
mm,
And he had become bedridden, and it got to the point he was severely depressed. He'd been in and out of hospitals, rehab hospitals, psychiatric hospitals. He'd actually gotten a course of electroconvulsive therapy, which did not work. He had tried innumerable medications, and I spoke with several doctors who all told me, your father's dying. He will never walk again. He's dying. And you just need to put him in a nursing home and let him die.
wow.
And I kept asking them, I'm a physician, so silly me. I kept asking, what exactly is he dying of? And they either would shrug their shoulders or they would come right out and say diabetes.
Right.
But it was clear that he was dying. His energy was failing. His nerves were no longer working. He wasn't able to walk. He wasn't able to even get up in bed on his own. And so I sat down with my dad and I had a long talk, and I'm like, look, Dad, if you're good on dying and you feel like it's your time, I'll arrange for a good nursing home, but you're basically going to lie in bed staring at a ceiling until you go. And that's a pretty miserable kind of
Mhm.
prospect. I said, if you actually want a shot at life, here's a proposition. You can move in with me, but
Wow.
here are some conditions. One is you're going to have to go on a diet. It's called the Atkins diet. And I'm going to make you go on it. And it's not going to be easy, and you're not going to like it, and you're going to complain a lot, but you have to do it. I don't want any lip service from you. You're just going to have to do it. The second condition was you're going to have to exercise. He kind of laughed at me at that point and said, Chris, I can't walk. Like, what the hell are you talking about? I can't walk. I can barely move. I can't even sit up on my own.
Right.
What are you talking about exercise? And I said, don't worry. I'm not going to ask you to do anything that you can't do, but I am going to ask you to exercise, and you're going to have to participate in that too. And you can complain all you want, but you're going to have to do it. And so he agreed to those terms. And I have to share with the listeners, the first month was actually quite dangerous. He was a brittle diabetic in the most severe way possible.
Mm-hmm.
He was on, again, 180 units of insulin. His blood sugars would range 300 to 600. As soon as I switched him over to a low-carb diet, he started getting episodes of pretty serious hypoglycemia.
Right.
Now, early on, the hypoglycemia might have been a blood sugar of 150, but at that blood sugar of 150, he was sweating, he was pale, he was almost passing out. So that's not something that I would recommend people just go out and wing it and try it on their own, because because I'm a physician, because I was there around the clock, and quite honestly, because the medical profession had given up on him, had pretty much told me he's dying, there's nothing you can do, put him in a nursing home, let him stare at a ceiling until he dies. I kind of felt like, well, we have nothing to lose. And so why not try this brave and kind of dangerous treatment? And so we did it. Within 6 months, he was off of insulin.
Wow.
And he was walking. And I took him to the gym, and we had this cheering section at the gym. These people who would see us coming day after day, week after week. And I live in the Boston area where people aren't so friendly. You don't talk to strangers in the Boston area. And but strangers were coming up to us, talking to us. They were coming up and saying, "Oh my God, I remember when you were coming in a wheelchair and you couldn't even stand up, you couldn't do anything. And look at you now. Like, oh my God, this is a miracle." And his primary care doctor actually said to me at that point, he said, "Chris, I don't know what the hell you're doing, but it really is nothing short of miraculous. I don't see this happen ever. Like, this doesn't happen." And he said to me at that point, it's always stuck in my mind. He said, "You really need to set up a clinic using this diet or doing this for people."
Right.
And my thought at that point was actually kind of anger and frustration. I was more like, why the hell aren't you doing this? You're his doctor, not me. I'm a psychiatrist, for God's sakes. I'm not planning to leave psychiatry and go into diabetes management. And I shouldn't have to be doing this. I should not have had to have gone through everything I went through. He shouldn't have had to have gone through everything he went through. The medical profession should have been doing this for him all along. And yet they weren't, and still to this day aren't.
Right.
But I've kind of witnessed the power of low carb or ketogenic diets in terms of weight loss and in terms of diabetes management. And the thing that I'm really excited and passionate about now is the mental health thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm happy I can keep talking. So just
please do. I was just looking for a pause. I mean, that's a remarkable story. That's a showstopper, that story by itself. It's like, I have to ask, how long ago was that? Is your dad still alive and still going to the gym? And what's the epilogue here, if there is an epilogue?
So the epilogue is a sad one, quite honestly. So that happened around 2007, 2008.
Okay, 10 years ago.
He lived with me for 3 years, and he got to the point where he really was dramatically better. I think I was always hoping that he would get better enough that he would want to go live independently.
Right.
And I think, unfortunately, being ill for so long and incapacitated, even as he got his capacity back, I think he became more dependent and I think felt afraid to live on his own and didn't necessarily have the drive to take care of himself in the way that most adults do.
Right.
And then, for better or worse, that was a point in my life where I was married, had a child, and was being threatened with divorce and a custody battle and financial ruin and all of that stuff. And so I went into my own crisis mode.
Right.
And for better or worse, unfortunately, I had several conversations with my father over many months, letting him know that I have my own battle to fight now. You're set. You're good.
Right.
You just need to keep it up. You need to stay on the diet. You need to keep exercising. I had home health aides who were coming into the home still, helping him do that, getting him to the gym. And I think when I kind of backed off and wasn't pushing him, wasn't the taskmaster anymore, he thought it was just too nice and too convenient and too enticing to go ahead and have some pie and go ahead and have some cookies. And so he really fell off the wagon in a dramatic way, and then started, declining invitations to go to the gym or go work out. Oh, I'll do that another time. I'm going to watch the football game. And things deteriorated enough that, I had a talk with him and let him know that, I had my own battles to fight. Mm-hmm. And that if he really didn't want to do the program anymore, that was up to him. But that I never intended to run a nursing home in my home. I intended to run a rehabilitation center. And in fact, that's what we had done over the last 3 years. And he was rehabilitated, and he needed to, at a minimum, accept responsibility for maintaining his
Right.
health and maintaining his rehabilitation. And for better or worse, he just didn't have it in him to do it. And so things got to a point where, I was going through my own shit with the divorce. And so, things got to a point where I arranged for him to go to a nursing home. I went and had several meetings with the dietitians at this nursing home, because he went into the nursing home still walking. He could walk in a walker. He was fine. He had slipped back somewhat, but he was still pretty good. Had several talks with them about, can you please keep him on a low carb diet? Can you please? No way. He's diabetic. We've got to put him on a diabetic diet, which is, of course, very high in those healthy carbohydrates. And we even talked about pies and cookies. And I said, please don't give him pie and cookie, because he's going to eat them all. And they were like, oh no, he won't. No, he's good. He'll take care of himself. And so within 4 months, he was again bedridden.
Wow.
It took them only 4 months, and he ended up passing away within a year.
Wow.
And that was the story.
That's a hard story.
It is a hard story, and it's sad that it didn't have a happier ending. My father and I mean, part of the background of that is that my father and I never got along. He and I were bitter enemies for most of my life, and I actually left home before I finished high school, and so it was hard for me to have done what I did for him in that 3 years.
I hear that.
But at the end of the day, I think it's a testament that there are no quick fixes. There's no one magic bullet. That people have to have the will to live. People have to be on board with taking care of themselves and with accepting responsibility for themselves. People do sometimes have to make sacrifices. Sometimes you can look around at other people eating cake and pie, and you have to say no.
Right.
And for better or worse, not everybody wants to do that. And I suppose it's on some level that's their choice.
Yeah.
To me, it's a sad choice, but it's their choice nonetheless. And
absolutely. That's not a small point. There was so Dr. Tom Segfried, he's in your neck of the woods there as well. And when I was interviewing him and doing some reading and talking to some of the people that he had worked with before, there was a case that they had published. I think Miriam had written it up in Hungary, I believe it was. So they did the ketogenic diet in conjunction with a number of other things. And it was a breast cancer, and all these things miraculously resolved. It was like a stellar story. And then the woman sort of disappeared. I mean, she had her own right. She just didn't come back to the clinic once she disappeared. And she came back, I think it was 10 months later, and stopped doing stopped doing the ketogenic diet, stopped doing all these things. And it all came raging back, and she died within a year of being clean. And so it speaks to, we get into the technical aspect and we know that it works, but we can't quite get into the mind of the person completely with that kind of support, and they need something, but it's not like, for instance, on you to have to supply those other things, or, maybe a clinic could supply some of that, but it's still kind of an undefined, and yet this other kind of emotional support, psychological support that most clinicians aren't prepared to do, or that's not available in that context. And so, I can quickly turn around. But it's a big point. It's a big point. I wanted to ask you a quick question. When you talked about your own diet and the carbs make you logy, I don't think you said logy, but slow. Are you saying you're like what they call zero carb or carnivore, or you're like, where are you on that? Is that an issue, or is like that's just a general reference?
Quite honestly, I'm all over the place, depending on, so there are times if I am feeling really sluggish, and especially if I've been off the wagon for a little while and I feel the need to kind of get back on the wagon quickly. And I want to improve my energy level. I want to improve my mood or something else. I do tend to go more carnivore diet. I tend to avoid almost all vegetables. Every now and then I might have a pickle with dinner, like a dill pickle, but otherwise I'm pretty much eating meat and meat and eggs. I'll certainly eat eggs and coffee with cream, but it's pretty heavy on the meat and very, very light on vegetables. And I've noticed that, at least for me, that does make a difference. It really does seem to make a difference. At other times, I will, have salads, have avocados, other things with healthy fats, with, olive oil. And, but I've tended to lean more toward the carnivore side for better or worse. And then I'll do intermittent fasts every now and then, skip breakfast, skip a lunch, skip dinner here and there as I feel like I can. And if I'm feeling good, if I'm not particularly hungry, I'll go ahead and skip a meal. And I exercise a lot. So exercise is really important to me. And I think it's a big part of the metabolic kind of therapy and taking care of one's health. And I like spin classes. I cycle outside, and I'm in Boston. I don't like to cycle in like sub-zero weathers. Right. But so in the winter, I tend to do indoor stuff, spin classes. I go to the gym. And then in the summer, I love to cycle outside, and I run and always do some weight training, always do some kind of stretching, yoga type stuff. And that's always a huge thing for me. Is I notice that even if I'm completely off the diet, if I can get a really good workout in and really sweat hard and long for an hour or more, I feel so much better.
That's funny. You're almost speaking from the articles you've written in Psychology Today. Was it exercise and fasting linked to brain detox, among others? But yeah, no, I agree. I think that whole interface between muscle and blood sugar, if that's what we're going to look at, or without even getting into the detox aspect, is a big, big deal. And it's easy to talk about diet, maybe not that easy, but it's harder to talk about exercise to a non-exercising group. If people grew up, being high school athletics, I won't say athlete, then it's easy to bring them back to that state. If they were never an exerciser, you're going, so what do you think about the gym? What do you think about a walk? What do you think about, exceeding that aspect? It's almost it's almost harder than bringing in a diet. I'm sure you probably know, but it sounds like it's part of who you are, by the way.
Hi, this is Dr. Goldkamp. I thought I would take a moment of your time to tell you about something that we've been working on for a long time, and that is our product of C8 Keto MCT oil. How is it different, and why would you even care about it? It's the highest purity you can find in the market, which is 99.7% caprylic acid triglyceride. And by the way, that's backed up by a certificate of analysis. It's not just me making up these numbers. But I think the bigger story behind our C8 MCT oil is not only that it is the most efficient way for you to create ketones naturally, and that is all three ketones, your beta-hydroxybutyrate, your acetoacetate, and your acetone. That's important. But the other part is it supports sustainably harvested palm oil. Why would you care? Because all the other C8 oil products out there, not the MCT oils, but the C8 MCT oils, some people call them ketogenic oils out there, they come from palm oil. And palm farming, specifically palm kernel farming in Southeast Asia, is decimating the rainforest there. Absolutely. You go on right now to Google or to YouTube and say palm oil Southeast Asia, and you will be in tears at the end of 10 minutes when you see the destruction that's happening. This is not part of that. This is the exception. So it's called RSPO, Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. You have to apply for it. You have to be audited by them. And it's a long, rigorous process. And it took us 2 years to bring this product to market. I hope you care. And I know you'll care about the efficiency in which it helps you make ketones. By the way, we don't drink this like it's a fluid. We put a little bit in our coffee. We make our mayonnaise out of it. We make various salad dressings out of it when we have a salad. It's basically I hate to say crutch, but it's my aid to keeping me in ketosis when I want to be in ketosis. It's fast, it's long lasting, certainly longer lasting than exogenous ketones and much more holistic, as I mentioned, with all 3 ketones. That's about as much as I want to say. I hope you look into it. I hope you take your ketones readings on a regular basis, along with your glucose. If you do, then you really value this product. All the best, and I thought you should know.